was like, just back up, girl.
He was a genius back then.
Yeah.
Come on. He saved your relationship. Thank goodness for you, David.
Just shut it. Just shh.
Like a little chihuahua.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Nacho Kids Podcast, where we discuss all things step family related. Real stories, real people, real help. Your hosts are the creators of the Nacho Kids Method and the Nacho Kids Academy Step Family Coaching Team, Lori and David Sims.
Welcome to episode 177 of the Nacho Kids Podcast.
That's right. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome. David, I am really upset that you will not let me throw tomatoes at you.
You do not need to throw tomatoes at me.
I do.
There's no demand for it.
There is demand.
I haven't seen it.
Y'all, please email me at Lori, Lori, at nachokids.com so I can show David that people want me to throw tomatoes at him. Please, I beg you.
No, they're listeners, so they don't want to see it. They just want to hear it.
No, that they can go to Instagram. They can go to TikTok. David, that would be a perfect TikTok video.
Mm-mm.
Yes.
Nobody wants to see me get hit with the tomato.
Y'all, please help a sister out.
Nobody.
Help a sister out.
All right, we'll see.
Okay, that was better than I got last time. So what's going on, David?
Seems like a lot. Seems like nothing.
I agree with that.
Some things I can talk about, some things I can't.
Oh, Lord, we will not go there today.
Nah, overall, life is good.
We're not ready for that. All right, so let's see. What can we talk about today? What do y'all people want to talk about? Nothing? Okay, we're good with that. Today, we will talk about nothing except for tell you a little bit about the Nacho Kids Academy. Then we'll tell about our guest today.
All right.
So the Nacho Kids Academy is the only place you can truly learn to nacho.
That's right.
There are video courses. There is an anonymous community. There are Q&A coaching calls, over 100 hours of previous Q&A coaching calls. And there is the Nacho Kids Boot Camp, the Change Your Stinking Thinking Challenge, and the Self-Care Challenge, because you need all of those things.
That's right. And you can find all that at nachokidsacademy.com.
That's right. Okay. Our guest today is Dr. Tara Egan. She is with Egan Counseling and Consulting. She has a podcast, One Day You'll Thank Me.
Yeah, I love the name of that.
David and I were a guest on her podcast, and we thanked her for being a guest on her podcast.
So she was right.
Yeah. She has been blending for 7 years, has 2 bio kids and 4 step kids.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I'm glad about is we are having more and more therapists and licensed family, marriage counselors, whatever all these people are, reach out. And I'm not dismissing what y'all are. Sorry.
We just don't know all the acronyms.
Yeah. But we're having these people reach out to us because they want to understand what the Nacho Kids, Nacho Parenting Method is. Because they understand that you cannot treat a blended or step family like a traditional family.
Yep.
So we're working on that book, y'all, so we can help you.
Yeah, we are.
We can help you, and we can help your therapist.
Maybe we should have the Nacho Kids Academy Therapist Edition.
Hey, that's an idea. All right. That's all I got to say right now, David.
What about the announcement about the club? Have you announced that yet?
We announced it last week.
On the podcast?
Yes.
Okay.
So, David, you want to mention it again?
So let's remind everybody that the Nacho Kids Club, or I guess we call it the Nacho Club.
Yeah, it's called the Nacho Club.
All right. So I just want to remind everybody that you can join the Nacho Kids Club absolutely free by going to nachokids.com/club. You can sign up there or log in there if you already have an account. And it is a completely free and anonymous, 100% anonymous community for you to go in there and chat with other folks. So it takes out all the craziness of Facebook because we run it.
All right, folks. You ready to get to listening?
Yep, let's do it.
Today we have Dr. Tara Egan. Hey, Tara, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
So you have Egan Counseling and Consulting, and you also have a podcast, One Day You'll Thank Me.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I'm a therapist. I'm a former school psychologist, and I do a ton of work with families who are experiencing separation or divorce or have started or are in the middle of the process of blending families. And so that's how we got to know each other. As you were a guest on my podcast, One Day You'll Thank Me. And then we got to do a little switcheroo.
Yeah. Well, today we thank you for letting us be on your podcast. One Day You'll Thank Me.
Oh, it was so good. You were just a fantastic set of guests. And I think that I've referred so many clients back to that episode to kind of get the flavor of nacho parenting. And so it's definitely phrasing that is often used in my office and in my practice.
Awesome.
What crossed your mind the first time somebody was like, what's this nacho parenting thing?
It's interesting, to even think of because I feel like I've known about it for a really long time, like several years or whatever. I mean, like not just recently. And so I'm not sure how I came across it, because I think probably I heard about it in a step parenting Facebook group.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody, this is my best guess from what I can recollect, made reference to it. And then I just Googled it and learned more about it. And then, I'm a step parent myself. So I have 2 biological children and 4 stepchildren. And I've been, I got remarried 7 years ago. And then I've been divorced 12 years. And so I've been, as my practice has grown, I've kind of developed this niche in working with families who are experiencing separation and divorce. And I do a lot of co-parenting. And then I've recently expanded my services to include parent coordination. And of course, if you're working with families who've experienced separation or divorce, you're also working with new, partnerships, and then the children that are within those. And so it kind of, obviously it just goes together so much. And so I've really made it a point to make sure I feel that I've made it a point to really understand the principles of it, because there's some people, especially families I work with, where they initially hear about natural parenting and their initial reaction is to be rejecting of it.
Mm-hmm.
To be like, no, that feels cold or dismissive or like giving up or something like that. And they kind of have to take a breath and give themselves a chance to sort of, all right, don't go into a defensive place. Let's, think about this more big picture, and then be given some guidance on how they would implement that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, honestly, if someone would have told us in the beginning, oh, you need to step back, you need to not be a parent to them.
I told you that. I was like, just back up, girl.
He was a genius back then.
Yeah.
Come on. He saved your relationship.
Oh,
thank goodness for you, David.
Just shut it. Just shh.
Like a little chihuahua.
Yeah.
Now tell the truth, David. That's not true.
That might have been what I was feeling, but I wouldn't have dared say it. I can say it now because I'm safe in
I'm
saying
talking
it.
about in the beginning. In the beginning.
Oh, no, the beginning. No.
In the beginning, you wanted me to play happy.
Oh,
family.
yeah. No, it was like, what do you mean you're not gonna, you want to have separate dinner times because things are stressful? Or what do you mean that we can't do bedtime activities together as one family? And, it just seemed crazy that it couldn't happen. Now, the caveat is it does, or it can happen over time. But, I just felt like we should be doing this within the first 3 to 6 months. What's taking so long?
So, yeah, if someone would have mentioned this to us in the beginning, I'd have been like, you're crazy. Because all the research we did, be like a family, be like a nuclear family. And that just did not work for us.
Mm-mm.
Well, the thing is no one who's struggling is going to feel like that's what you do as step one. Or, for a family that is just starting to get acquainted, that doesn't feel like the intuitive thing to do, is start off slow and stay in your lane and don't get involved in someone else's drama, and, view yourself as a trusted adult versus a parent. We have this image when we're remarrying, that the relationship is just going to be beautiful and connected, and like our family's special because we found our way together after this hardship of this prior relationship. And like my kids are going to recognize the value that I'm able to bring and, you know, to their life. Like you have these feelings, and then, you know, it doesn't play out that way because, you know, there's wounds from the separation or divorce. And like we're dealing with children, with children's brains. And even if they're adult children, there's still, you know, a place you go as a child of people. And so by the time people get to me, things aren't going well. And sometimes where they look at it as like this, because the alternative is ending this relationship and not moving forward with this family unit. And so sometimes that can compel people to take the first step and like learn more.
Right. And that was the case with us. It was a last ditch effort to save our marriage. And I think if you come into it, and that's the case of either I try this and see if it works or we're done, then you have a different outlook on it. You're willing to try it. You don't judge it. You don't criticize it so much. You're like, okay, I'm willing to try this. And I think like you, most of the people that we deal with are at their wits' end, and they are at the place of this is make it or break it. Now, we do have a few that we have worked with that come in straight in the beginning and they want to learn everything they can, and God bless them. They are doing the right thing, because if we can help them not to go through the pain we went through, then we've definitely accomplished something.
I agree. I hear you on that, because there's sometimes where the beginning of my relationship with a family is while they're like initially separating. And so they're going through the transition of like, now we're no longer living in the same house. We're communicating about a separation or divorce to the kids. We're developing new routines as single parents. And then, you know, eventually it evolves into introducing, you know, dating life. And so sometimes that happens where I can give some support in the very beginning to keep it from getting like too gnarly. And then of course that's helpful. But, you know, for some of the blended families where everything's terrible, you know, my stepkids don't like me, I don't like them, you know, like my spouse and I are arguing about what my role is or what each other's role is. And when it doesn't work out well, people just feel like everything is terrible and it isn't what they expected. So sometimes like there is so much pain at that point that, you know, they can be receptive to trying something different.
Right. And I know you've seen this too, but you almost have to go through a grieving process of what you thought this blended family was going to be like. We all go in with expectations, whether we realize it or not. And those expectations are basically nuclear family expectations. And then we have to go through that grieving process of being angry, being in denial, then acceptance and all that stuff, the normal grieving process, to be able to move forward and accept things for what they are and stop letting our dreams feel like they're crushed.
I think that I see more grief in stepmothers who don't have their own biological children.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes they feel they're going to go into this relationship, feel really connected and be treated with the respect and emotional connection that the original mother, bio mother, whatever you want to call it. And then it's not at all like that. And so, and they don't have their own biological kids to get that motherly connection from.
Or as a distraction.
So, that's true. Because sometimes the reality is you're dealing with your biological kids' health problems or homework or social conflicts, and you don't have the real estate to get it super involved in something that's happening with stepkids. I mean, that's absolutely true. But there's times where stepmoms will marry this new partner and they're like, I'm part of this family and I'm here and I'm ready. And the kid's like,
Right. And it's also hard for childless or child-free stepmoms, from our experience, for them to understand things like guilty parent syndrome, or when the significant other only has the kid every other weekend and the stepmom feels ignored.
Well, they're not ignoring you. They're parenting their kid or spending time with their kid. And I think, again, not having children of your own, it does make it harder in so many ways.
That and recognizing that, let's say you have 2 stepchildren and they do need something different. So you have one kid who's got, who is more sensitive or who struggles more with motivation or emotional regulation. And they're like, well, why don't you just tell them to stop it right now?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, and it looks like the parent is just kind of spoiling their kid when in reality, they're really working to be emotionally responsive based on a lifetime of experience with this child.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying they're always doing it right all the time, but there isn't necessarily the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
It's kind of like, well, you just let her run all over you.
Mm-hmm.
And she's ruling this house and you need to say no. And you need to tell her mother no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like David used to help one of the kids do dishes when it was their night to do dishes. And I'm thinking, why are you helping this child do dishes? He's 16 years old. And David made a comment to me one day. He said, that's the only time I get to spend with him.
Mm-hmm.
We have to stop being critical in our eyesight with the parents and their kids. And that's what I think we do. How many times do you feel like when you talk to people that the stepmom especially is sitting at that dinner table just waiting for little Johnny to do something wrong so she can go, see, little Johnny just did that. Did you see what he just did?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do about it? Don't you think he should be punished?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we want to do that? We're trying to teach the bio parent or show the bio parent that little Johnny's not angelic, but all we're doing is making ourselves look bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where that disengagement can really be helpful, is to step away from that circumstance versus feeling so impassioned to set that situation straight because, you're looking at it objectively somehow, which is not true at all. You're not objective.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny. We hear sometimes, and usually from the stepmom, they say, I came in and I saw all these problems and I wanted to fix them. And the funny part is, a lot of the things they say are problems are only problems in their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
The other parents like that, I don't see a problem here. There's nothing to fix. The fact that my kids are running up and down the steps is not a problem for me. I like the pitter patter. And then the other person's like, it's driving me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to fix things that aren't broken. They're just, they're broken for you, and that needs to be addressed. But it has to be done properly.
And keeping in mind what's developmentally appropriate for children.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if let's say you do have a biological child and they did it a certain way. Well, when they were in 4th grade, they started getting up by themselves with an alarm clock, and you're going and waking up Johnny every morning.
Mm-hmm.
My kids didn't do that, as though therefore the standard of all children has been set,
Right.
because your child got up cheerfully in 4th grade with an alarm, and you have a 7th grader who's not doing that. And it doesn't mean that there can't be opportunities for discussions, or I think even better is role modeling. I know sometimes I have 2 daughters, they're same age, one biological, one stepdaughter. And like, there's sometimes like one of them would do something, the other would be like, hey, that seems cool. Like I could do that, but we didn't have to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
They learn from each other, just like all kids learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we did a pretty good job not getting over involved, especially my husband.
Mm-hmm.
He has always been able to be true Switzerland, where he's there to support and connect, but he's not there to like discipline and get on their cases. And so he like stays in the sweet spot for my kids like all the time.
There you go. Nachoing is like being Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Be Switzerland, step
Be
parents.
Switzerland.
Is that
Yeah.
what it is?
Yeah, I was going to say stepmoms, but step parents too.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we have stepdads who can be really controlling, and they want to be like dominating in the family. And they're like, I'm now the man of the house, and I'm here to be directive.
Mm-hmm.
And your mom's not going to be the only voice.
Mm-hmm.
And that can cause conflict.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah. What do you say to people that we have this issue where I say it's the issue, it's an opportunity. People come to us sometimes and they say, I'm going to a therapist, I'm going to a counselor, and I want to talk to them about nachoing, how do I start that conversation? Because we've seen sometimes where it goes badly, and sometimes it's like, oh, great, I'll look into this, and they come back and they understand how they can kind of use what they're doing with what we're doing and make it work together. But how would you answer that question? Like, how, if you're already in counseling or therapy, how do you bring that up and see whether or not it's something that can go well with what you're doing?
I mean, it'd be really handy if you guys wrote a book.
Working on
I'm just
it.
saying, like, get on this, because it needs to be a resource that is accessible for therapists to have on their bookshelf as a resource that they can do school discussion. And that you all need to do trainings with therapists and get us some continuing education credits to learn about different modes of step parenting or different approaches. And so that's probably would be helpful. But if the book isn't written yet, I think some of it is, I mean, first of all, I think you do need to find a therapist who has some experience in truly not just like general adjustment in families or even family conflict, but really the specifics of step families and blended families. And so I think some of that is, connecting to people who sort of advertise that they do that work. And I can't imagine doing the work I do to the degree I do it if I wasn't a step parent. And that can't be a thing. Like, we can't have every therapist out there has lived through the thing that they have a niche in.
Right.
Like the therapist who specializes in suicide by definition cannot have committed suicide, like, and so, but in people really, they have some place where it touched their lives and they feel, passionate about it. But to really come home and have your biological kids still be reeling from whatever the divorce wrought on them, combine them now with other kids who've also been through a divorce, be co-parenting with a spouse that went through a divorce, and everybody's had their interpretation and think that's going to go smoothly with, support from your individual therapist who maybe, does a really great job with depression and anxiety. It just might not quite be the best fit. There's divorce coaches out there. There's therapists who specialize in it. I think that some of the blog posts and, you guys have been on like the Today Show. I don't know if it's their blog or what it is, but like being able to give them an email or some sort of resource that they can forward on to a therapist. I know if I have a client who's like, hey, I heard about this treatment for ADHD, like, have you heard of it? Like, if I haven't, I'm going to definitely make sure I'm familiar with it, because I want to see, is there science? Who's the person who's touting it? Is this some flash in the pan thing that, like, I am happy to discuss anything that is got true support and, behind it. And if it doesn't, like, we need to move on. We can't have false hope. So I think that when people can reference specific points to share with their therapists, that because if a therapist has no experience with step parenting or blended families, I could see a therapist being like, well, that doesn't seem very attachment friendly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We've had some people that they come to us and they'll say, like, I'm talking to a therapist and, talk to them about, the first step in, the nacho parenting, which is usually the disengagement part, not the final step, first step.
Yeah.
And the therapist said to me, you just need to love them more. You need to double down on what you're doing, which I always say, just do more of what's not working. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And they're pushing this struggling step parent to suicide at times because they're telling them, oh, you're just doing it wrong. And the person already feels like they're doing something wrong.
Well, I equate it to burnout. So when we have therapists who are experiencing burnout and we, show signs of it, right? Like with a colleague, what our colleague is going to tell us, step back, take a breath, take care of yourself, realize what you're equipped to handle. We don't say, you know what, just see more clients. Like just really dig in to really intense cases and you're going to find your mission again. Like no one would ever say that about burnout. And that is what step parenting that's not going well, and you're being told to love harder and all of that stuff, is you're driving them towards that same principle of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow we're expecting it to go better, even though there's no other place we would give that same advice. Like, that doesn't, make sense to me. And sometimes how we love people, like a healthier love, is stepping back. I mean, you just even think of parenting a teenager.
Yes.
And realizing what is healthy autonomy. And the fact that your kid's not telling you about the new crush they have doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. It might just be where they're at developmentally. And that shows them having the capacity to develop a connection to a person that's outside of their nuclear family. And it doesn't mean you're not going to be in the background, quietly supportive, but you're not going to be like, all right, let me sit between you on your date and make sure this is going well.
It sounds just like
You
Lori.
wouldn't. Like, you wouldn't do that, and nobody would expect you to. But somehow with step parenting, you're supposed to like get in there more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm sure that just from your experience, that depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts are extremely high in step parents because of these unrealistic expectations placed on them, whether it be from society, their significant other, their in-laws, whoever it may be. It puts them in a bad place. And then they go on Facebook and they see these rainbows and unicorn stepmoms that only show their life as, being perfect and everything's great. And that just makes them feel worse. And I've said before that rainbows and unicorns, you're more looking like donkeys and tornadoes, because that's what the reality is. It's not rainbows and unicorns. But as step parents, we've got to stop attacking other step parents too. I see it all the time in my Facebook group and other Facebook groups, and it drives me crazy.
I can't be on your Facebook group. It
I
is
know.
I can't
those
either.
people, they're
either.
so mean to each other. And there's some movie, I wish I could think of what it is, or a TV show. And it's one of those situations where dad marries like his second partner, and she's really, just pretty and cheerful and stuff. And there's somebody who they're at like a party or a birthday party or something. And one parent says to her, like, oh my goodness, your stepson's getting so big. And she's like, he can't stand me. And she just like, you could see her and like, she kind of tries to laugh it off, but you could tell she's like on the verge of a breakdown.
Yes.
He absolutely hates me. And you're kind of left with like, whoa, that's not what I expected her to say, and I think, oh my goodness, there's so many step parents who have that feeling. And also, 'cause a lot of step kids feel that way too. Like, my step parent doesn't like me. They find me annoying. They are on my case all the time. And I mean, they're not dum-dums. Like, they get the vibe most of the time.
Oh, definitely. And I know my Facebook group is off the chain. I try to remember though, a lot of times the hurt people.
Yeah.
So I try to give people a little leeway, but usually you can tell people that are just downright mean. And Nacho is not going to make you not be mean. You've got
that's not going to solve that.
Yeah, you've got a lot to work on, and it's not your stepkids that's making you mean. You were mean before.
That's a good point. And you might feel like you have a reason now, to be mean. And I tell parents, like, if you're struggling or absolutely failing to have any charitable thoughts towards your stepchildren, you are absolutely burned out. You are probably hurting them, like emotionally. Your co-parent's going to see it, and that's going to make them really struggle with you, because I know as a parent, probably the most horrifying thing my husband could do would be to be mean to my children.
Yes.
And so there just isn't a choice at that point, as far as, like you said, like self-preservation. But there's sometimes I'm like, all right, if you have the story you're telling yourself on what stepmotherhood looks like, fine, you tell your brain that all day long, but you're hurting these kids. Like, if you can't do it for yourself, like, do it for these kids. Like, sometimes with the work that I do, I have to sort of give them permission to redefine what stepmothering looks like.
Yes.
and give them the ability to like say no, set the boundaries, regroup, take care of themselves, connect with the things that they do feel successful at, whether it's working on this cool project at work or having coffee with a friend you haven't seen in a while.
Mhm.
Because the energy that can be burned up from hyper focusing on all the ways that your spouse and stepkids are letting you down. And then not to mention what negativity you might be communicating about these other family members to your biological children who are also tasked with forming a relationship with these kids and
Yes.
the other step parent. I mean, it gets really messy. And so sometimes like the most clear, easiest thing to do is step back. And it doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be said snidely.
Right.
You know, you don't have to have passive aggressive statements. Like it's the quiet calm as being the quiet calm in the storm, because I promise you, it's been storming
Mhm.
and you may have been part of the center of it, but like you can choose to step away from that. And like we talk about how you would do that, specific examples, going through, okay, what would dinner look like? What would dinner time look like if you didn't harp on their manners? Or if you didn't get all upset in anticipation that one of your stepkids isn't going to like what you made, or they're not going to
Right.
eat what you made.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or get all upset on Wednesday because the stepkids are coming Friday and you're
Mhm.
stressed out 2 days before they come. And you've created these scenarios in your head of how horrible it's going to be.
Yeah. I like
Yeah.
to
It's not going to be positive if that's what you're thinking.
I told somebody one time, I said, you need to think about sometimes that it's not necessarily things that are happening to you, it's things that are happening because of you.
Mm.
Dude, you would have thought I was spitting this person's face. They were like, what?
You put that in my Facebook group.
I did. Yeah, I did that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I did
tough because we're
yeah.
trying not to trash other step parents, but then there's times where we're like, oh, it actually is you. And that's, you have to have that compassion and the authority to be able to say that and not have them feel like you're just like, you know, pooping on their attempts to create a new family.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you also have to understand that oftentimes, no matter what's going on in the family, most of the time, you have some role you're playing in this. And it's not that you're the bad guy or bad woman, whatever. It's just that you play a role in it. And I can look back and say, for as much problem as I thought Lori was primarily in the relationship in the beginning, because she was overstepping and she was overparenting and she was doing all this stuff, mainly because I asked her to. I didn't realize it at the time, but you know, I kind of put her those expectations up front. She was just doing what I expected, and then I didn't want it. And then it was, oh, but looking back on it, I can say, wow, I had actually not only a role, but I had a fairly big role in the bad things that were happening. But it was like I looked at Lori as the problem, but it was more of a symptom. The problem was more about the expectations I put on her, the expectations that we both had of what this is supposed to look like. And then all these other things of the lens that we were looking through, the stories we were telling ourselves, those were all the problems. It was the symptom was just all the chaos on the top.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. It's all families are dynamics, you know, it's a family dynamic. Everybody has a role to play in it. You know, theoretically, we're the adult with the adult brain who should have more self-control than the children. But there's so many times a step parent will say, but they, and I'm like, oh, but you're the grown up. Like you're going to have to tap into your grown up. You get to drive yourself to a counselor or use your debit card to pay for a divorce coach or buy a coffee with your friend on a Saturday instead of listening the kids squabble with their dad about getting ready for soccer.
Mm-hmm.
Like you actually get to tap out because you're the step parent, not the parent,
Right.
and like choose differently. And so it can be really important for them to focus on, you know, what they can control.
Mm-hmm.
And do that, because you can't make your stepkid not eat like a pig or your stepdaughter love doing homework or follow through with, you know, a request to empty the dishwasher. That can't be the circus you're part of.
Right. And you can't make your significant other make them do that also. So I can't make David make his kids stop eating like they're at a zoo. Or I can't make David make his kids do the chores the way I think they should be done. And I think a lot of it boils down to control. And one of the things that I learned when creating this Nacho Kids method was I was trying to control things I had no control over in the first place. But what I did have control over is how I let these things affect me. I can be mad about the dishes not being done for 2 days if I want to, but who wants to be like that? And so when I started putting things in a different perspective, my life is so much less stressful. I'm not saying it's completely stress-free because I am married to David.
You're a person.
But
you exist.
Right. Yeah. But if something happens and something gets torn up, it's not the end of the world. I've learned with the stepkids, I put up stuff that I didn't want to get broken. Same thing with my kid or the dogs. You put those things up because you don't want them to get broken, because you don't want to have to deal with that. But things happen. And for instance, my nephew and one of David's kids were wrestling in the living room. And now this was recently, last couple of years. So they were adults at the time, but I'm cheering them on. You know, I'm right there in it. Well, David's kid lifted up my nephew and his foot hit the light in the on the ceiling fan, and it fell and it broke and it chipped the floor. Normally, pre-Nacho, I would have been sick about that. Honestly, for probably a week, because it was a new floor, it was a new light, and it's broken. But you know what? I'm choosing to look at that because I still have not replaced that lampshade or that light cover. We don't need it. It's fine. We get more light without it. But anytime I see that chip on the floor, I'm looking at it as a good memory that we have with his son and with my nephew, rather than, oh, my floor's ruined.
Or this was done to you somehow. Like these kids did this to me, or my stepson did this. Kids were playing. You were actually encouraging it.
Yes.
And an accident happened.
Right.
Like it was just an accident.
Right.
Versus if you frame it as like, look what he did. He doesn't respect our home. There he goes again, breaking things. Just like he's done time and time again. And you create that narrative. Yeah, you're going to be really frustrated by it, and it's going to linger.
Yeah.
But we have so much control over our thoughts. And that's one of the things, and one of the challenges we have in the academy is change your stinking thinking, because you can take that thought and you can let it spiral into the step kid did it on purpose. They're always tearing up stuff, how much money we're having to spend to replace things that they broke, how disrespectful they are, blah, blah, blah. Or you can stop and say, it was an accident. And I'm not going to let it take 5 minutes of joy away from my life. And of course, I'm not saying sweep your emotions under the rug, but if you need to be mad, take 5 minutes, set a timer and be mad. When you sit there with a timer and try to be mad for 5 minutes, that's a long time. But yet we will let things carry with us for months if we let it.
Well, what people don't often realize is these stories, like what you were just saying, how you tell yourself these stories, oftentimes these things happen so quickly that we don't realize that we're telling ourselves these stories. And we are. In every circumstance, it's happening. And then when something happens, it goes through the lens of that story quickly, sometimes in a blink of an eye. And then that's how you choose to then react, because you're not reacting necessarily to the truth. You're reacting to the story that you told yourself.
It's filtered through that story.
Yep.
Yeah. And a lot can have to do with your childhood, because I've realized a lot of things that I don't know the word I'm looking for, that come natural to me, come from my mom and how she treated me. And I have to stop that because there was not a good relationship there. So I have to pause. And a lot of times we don't pause. That's something else that we teach in the academy, is you've got to pause. Now, men are great with their 30-second delay.
We're perfect.
Yeah. They're just like,
yeah.
You think about it.
Yeah. Where women, we're Johnny on the spot. The step kid does something, and before David could even turn his head to look, we're saying, look what he did. or we're fussing at the kid,
Mhm.
we have to pause. And I've learned that when I pause or when a step parent pauses, it allows the bio parent to see these things for themselves and removes the target off of our back for
Lord.
tattling on the kid.
Lord, I remember there was a time when I honestly could not go to the mailbox. I was afraid to walk to the mailbox because the 2 minutes it would take to walk down the driveway and back, all heck would have broke loose.
Mhm.
And he's not exaggerating.
Yeah, I'm like, all the kids get in the car. We're going to the mailbox.
Let's all
because
hold hands and walk to the end of the
Yeah,
driveway.
because I can't-
Yeah.
yeah, I cannot leave anybody alone with Lori because something will blow up.
Mhm.
Ugh, that's so hard. That's such a stressful place to be in. I know that with kind of the reframing that I encourage parents to do, I do this with kids too, is like, to tell yourself something truthful,
Mhm.
but positive.
Mhm.
And so to say, oh goodness, thankfully the cover to that light is just not very expensive to replace. I can buy one on Amazon.
Right.
Like, this is a problem that's easily solved. Like, it costs $9.99 to get a globe for that light fixture to put back up there. Like, this is a thing that with a click of Amazon button is solved.
Right.
Or, there's something that's truthful is, gosh, the boys were getting wild, but I'm glad they were having fun.
Mhm.
Or, something like, maybe that even might be more kumbaya than even what feels authentic.
Mhm.
But I tell people all the time, like, there is a truth, something you can tell. I'm not telling you to, blow smoke and pretend that something is amazing when it's not.
Right.
But there is ways that this can be framed that is truthful, but also has the positive spin on it. And it takes practice. Like you said, what feels natural, that default thinking
Right.
that you have kind of programmed into you because of hearing a certain message from your parents or whatever from, the beginning of time. Like you're having to like deprogram that. And if
Right.
you are just like, I need to stop thinking this way, it's not as effective as saying, what am I going to think of instead?
Right.
Like, my brain wants to say that he did it on purpose, but
Mhm.
like, what's the active, almost like a mantra
Mhm.
that you can say when your stepkid refuses to eat your dinner, the next time, or when it feels like your spouse is being oblivious to the annoying things their kids are doing, or whatever. Like, you got to have some default. Like,
Mhm.
you need to have a replacement thought that's
Right.
there and ready that you can
Yes.
go to and teach your brain to do that more automatically, instead of going to the negative, maybe even irrational or untruthful thought,
Right.
Mhm.
and linger there. And then you're trying to dig yourself out of that emotional hole.
Mhm. And it
Like,
takes
that's-
practice.
Oh, yeah.
I know I pass the house every day. Well, when I would go somewhere every day, but every time I leave the house and come back, I pass the house that my sister died in. Well, the first few times that I would pass the house, I would see in my head the picture of her lying on the floor dead. And I would relive it every time that I passed that house. And one day I said, I've got to stop. I have got to stop. And I knew how to replace my thoughts. So there's a picture that she took where she's holding her nose up like a pig.
Mhm.
And so what I did was, before I even get to the house, I start thinking about that picture. I think of where she's sitting, what chair it is, what outfit she has on. So by the time I've passed that house, I haven't allowed myself to think about her lying on the floor dead.
Mhm.
And we can do that. We can convince ourselves of other things and replace those thoughts. And it's so much better when we do that. I know, I think you and I talked about this when we did your podcast, Dr. Daniel Amen.
Oh gosh, I can't remember.
I
What did we
love
say about
him. He's actually spoke at our church, and he, studies brains. Well, our preacher is an ex-NFL player, so he had his brain scanned and all this. So I started researching him and looking into his studies, and it's amazing what we can do with our minds. We can convince ourselves we climb Mount Everest. I live in South Carolina, but I can convince myself I climbed Mount Everest yesterday. It's crazy to think what you can convince yourself.
That was called getting out of bed.
Yeah.
Well, I recently had Dr. Layla Forbes on my podcast. The episode hasn't been released yet. And she is an expert in chronic pain management through therapy. So she's not like giving pain pills or neurofeedback or, or physical therapy or something like that. She's a mental health therapist who basically does like a whole cognitive restructuring experience to teach clients to not cue their brain to be so quick to experience pain or make the assumption or anticipate pain.
Right.
And I am not doing it justice at all, how she explained it. But I had back in April, I had, what is it called? Shingles, which is incredibly painful. And so so even though when I had her come on the podcast, I was like, oh, I have no real experience with this. And then when she was talking about like how your default thinking is and the anticipatory pain and like the rituals you can end up going into that contributes to you experiencing pain more and like causing your nerves to actually be more prepared to fire in the way that causes painful feelings, and how the work she does is like reprogramming that whole system to minimize pain. Because, some people have these, I was lucky enough that you have shingles and you take the medicine and you have, maybe some residual nerve pain and, it passes. But other people are living a lifetime, of pain, and they have to have a way to manage it. And that's what she does for her work. And it was such a great, tangible illustration of how our thinking. And, that those go-to internal assumptions contribute to tangible physical symptoms like that, and how she is reprogramming the situation to give these people relief. And it was, I thought it was fascinating. Like I was always into learning more about it, but like how she described it, how relatable it was. And, talking about kind of the trauma of that people experience when they have chronic pain. And, we're talking about step parenting, and it's not the same thing, but there is an element in which if you're not doing it mindfully, you can walk around this world just feeling like you're repeatedly falling on your face over and over and over. And it feels relentless and it feels like it's never going to end. No one appreciates you and this is never going to get better. And these kids just don't appreciate me or whatever. Man, you're in that spiral. Like, how are you going to take joy in your marriage or these kids?
Exactly. It's
actually
like they
forget they're people.
Yes. You've definitely got me interested. I'm going to have to check her out. Because
Dr. Layla Forbes.
When you were talking about her, I'm thinking, look at how this relates to step families. It's completely relatable.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to ask you something about co-parenting.
Okay.
Because you said that you deal with co-parenting. Do you deal with co-parenting between the exes?
Mostly I do for the parents who are either newly split up, like they're separated, or they're divorced. They may or may not have new partners, and they are trying to both parent their biological, shared child.
Okay. And the reason I ask is because we always need resources for things that is not in our wheelhouse or things that are not in our wheelhouse. And co-parenting is one of them. My ex basically said, unless it's a medical emergency regarding my son, don't contact me.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a good co-parenting relationship with his ex. There was always a competition kind of thing. So what would you say? And I'm just curious because I'm almost through with the 18-year mark with my son and his dad. Thank you, Jesus. When you have one person that absolutely refuses to co-parent, anything that is told to them, you could say, I gave little Johnny Tylenol at 3:00 because it's important to know what time you gave medicine. And they hear, you don't know how to parent, you idiot. So here's the instructions to give little Johnny Tylenol, and I gave it to him at 3:00. Or just anything is taken out of context to where it's an attack on them. What would you tell somebody like that? Because I just gave up trying.
Yeah. And there's a certain degree where there's, some of those same principles apply here of nachoing applies where you have to do your due diligence to communicate. So there is a fantastic resource out there named Bill Eddy is his name, Eddy. And he's written a series of books, and he is a licensed clinical social worker and a former attorney. And so he does a lot of like parenting seminars and things like that. But he has a principle called BIFF, which is BIFF, and it's brief, informative, firm, and friendly. And he basically talks about how your communication, and when you have a high conflict X, typically a good kind of policy is to shift to not doing in-person communication, not standing in the driveway or trying to talk at the baseball game where you're sending texts, emails, and it's all just documented in there. You're able to do the pause thing where you can think about your response. And so a lot of it is I will take the communication, like we go ahead and have it become written. And then from there, I'm like, all right, let's pull some examples here and let's talk about what you actually need to attend to. And the fact is, Johnny took medicine at 3:00 and he took, 2 milliliters. And then when he comes back of like, why are you telling me how to parent? Like, that's all garbage. Like, don't
entertain it.
No need to respond here. Like I teach parents, like, respond to what you have to. Like if he says, well, are you giving him baby Tylenol? Or are you giving him children's Tylenol? Like that's an actionable question. Maybe you think they're asking it snidely or whatever, but like there's a finite answer. I gave him children's, like there's an answer.
Right.
But I don't know why you always think he needs to take Tylenol. I feel like every time he has a fever, you feel like you have to medicate it with some sort of over the counter. We need to like starve a fever or whatever, like none of that needs to be responded to. Like you are a competent parent. You made the decision to give him Tylenol, children's Tylenol, 2 milliliters at 3 p.m. You've conveyed it to your parent, your co-parent, like we're done here.
Right.
But a lot of parents feel the need to defend themselves, to engage. I'm going to keep talking until he or she sees that I made a good decision. The reality is it wouldn't matter. They're not going to think you made a good decision. And you have to stop caring.
Yes.
That, of whether or not they feel you are. Like, I'm literally a parenting expert. Like, that's what my job is. I write parenting books. I have a parenting podcast. I'm an expert in this. There's one person in the world who thinks I'm a terrible parent. One.
Your ex.
It doesn't have to do with Dr. Terry Egan. It has to do with the role that I am, which is ex-wife.
Right.
And it's just actually not that personal. Now I say this 12 years out. So, I mean, I wouldn't have said this 1 year out. So,
yeah, we tell people all the time that the whole nacho process, you can apply it to different things. Like I nacho Walmart, I nachoed my ex. I gave up. I'm trying to have that co-parenting relationship. We parallel parent. Basically any messages are, he has a doctor's appointment for this, your percentage is going to be this, basically. And in the beginning, though, pre-nacho, it wasn't like that. And David wasn't like that either. We would spend hours,
days,
trying to respond to these stupid emails that the exes sent attacking us and wanting to address every single little thing they said. And it didn't take long before we realized, no, I'm done with this.
The best conversation stopper is the word, okay.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Right. So if anything needed to be addressed, those things were addressed. Yes, little Johnny has a volleyball game at such and such time, whatever. But if nothing had needed to be addressed, okay, received. That way they know you got it because you want them to know you got it, because if not, they're going to keep messaging you, wanting to make sure you got it. Or my ex, one of his favorite things was, whatever, Lori. I hated that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about that gripes me.
Which he knows.
Yes, of course. He knows how to push my buttons probably better than anybody. Well, my son and David now, but it's the saying my name. If he would have just said whatever, it doesn't have the same impact as when he says whatever, Lori.
And there's no judge who's going to be like, how dare you say her name?
Right.
Like it's,
right.
You know what I mean? Like it's very subtle. Mm-hmm. And I'm not above acknowledging I've probably used that same strategy to just, it's passive aggressive, it's childish, and it's a clear, easy sort of win to inflame somebody.
Mhm.
And when you just learn to disengage from that, or you do, the eye roll
Mhm.
and stuff. And I think for me, it's so freeing for me to recognize, like, the people I respect, I want to respect me.
Right.
The people I don't respect, I don't need to respect me, because like, we're just fundamentally different. Like, we're just not on the same page. I can't win them all. It would
Yeah.
be great if I could with my ex. I mean, that would be fantastic. But like, there's just a point when that ship has sort of sailed, and you got to just mentally move on. I have my best friend, who's not a therapist. She's just a good person. She, one time when I was going through court stuff and mediation, and I was driving to this deposition, and I called her and I was just like, I just feel so shaky. I'm just really struggling. I'm so nervous. And she like walked me through this imagery of like putting the stressful things in a backpack.
Yes.
And like, we put it in, and then we zipped it up and we threw it off the cliff. And she's like, talk. And, and it's not that she's super intuitive. This wasn't like a therapy exercise. This was just in the moment, her like getting me to calm down, because it's so nerve-wracking doing all the court stuff.
Yes.
But I mean, man, I have used that analogy so many times since then for various reasons. And I've coached, clients and stuff through whatever version of that speaks to them. But there are times when it comes to the co-parenting relationship, it's kind of as strong as the weakest member. So if you have somebody who's just not going to take it seriously, show respect, have a level of collaboration,
be an adult,
be interested in keeping the conflict low, then you got to do what you can do, and you don't need to always bark back.
Yes.
And it's super empowering when the person is just, they're there and they're refreshing their email, and they're like, I know she's going to reply. And you're just like, delete, and you've moved on to go and swim in with your family. Like, that is the most powerful thing you can do.
Yes.
Well, maybe someday he'll thank you.
Maybe. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
And the thing is I kind of just don't like need him to, thankfully. I mean, you get to that place where you're just, there's so much about it that actually isn't personal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now I know co-parenting or parallel parenting, when you have a child who has serious health concerns or is really struggling behaviorally or something, like, I have pretty easy kids. Like, we just don't need to have a ton of communication. We have the freedom, true freedom, to parallel parent. And the big win for my kids is the conflict is low. And then if there is some discrepancy or something between houses, like, the downside of that is not overcoming the win of us not having conflict. But if you have, you're trying to parent a kid where you're making medical decisions, or there needs to be really clear and constant communication. I mean, I've had kids who they're suffering from like a genetic disorder, and they're on a huge series of medicines, and they're trying to coordinate nursing care. And I mean, sometimes their stress level is so high they just don't have the energy to fight. And, that's sad in its own way. But those are families, like, what ends up happening if you can't co-parent is custody just gets given to one parent, and the other parent gets phased out.
Yes. You mentioning some of the struggles with co-parenting and having an ill child. I think that's one of the things that helped me put things into perspective too, when it came with the stepkids. I remember reading a post someone had put in my Facebook group. Stepkid took a black Sharpie and wrote on the back of their new white leather couch. This woman was devastated. She wanted to end her marriage because of this. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. First of all, it's on the back of the couch. Slide it up against the wall. Change that negative to a positive. But then I had a friend that she had a daughter that had a terminal illness. And I remember thinking, what that friend would not give for her child to be able to walk to the couch and write on that couch. And
we do have to be careful though about comparing pains,
yes,
because there can always be like, how dare you feel sad because this other person's pain? Like, you know what? That is hugely disrespectful. That was an expensive couch. She didn't deserve to be treated that way. And now you do all that thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come back around to, thank goodness it's just a couch.
Right.
Because that kid who wrote on it, assuming they weren't 3 years old,
Mm-hmm.
because 3-year-olds are going to write on anything and it's
Right.
not personal. That kid was sending you a message. Like, they probably know you well enough to know how much you value that couch.
Mm-hmm.
Just like my husband just bought a Corvette, and we keep joking that that my husband loves the car more than us.
Oh,
and
he does.
Yeah, he does. And like, it'll be like kind of around bedtime, and he'll have just appeared, and we're all like, oh, Pete's going and saying goodnight to his car. And I think he does. I'm pretty sure. I know he misses it when he goes out of town. But
Mhm.
man, if my kids went out there and scratched his car, I mean, there is no other way you could hurt him more.
Mhm.
Like, it would be, he probably could tolerate someone like running over his mother more than, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And so
yeah.
like, and that is when you say the devastation thing, like the amount of disrespect and like spitefulness that must have felt like to that stepmom.
Mhm.
And I have sympathy, it breaks my heart to think how painful that must have been. And you're
Mhm.
right, it is a couch, and your kid is healthy, and you're going to get through this. And someday you're going to be like, oh my gosh, remember when you were 15
Mhm.
and you did that? Like, I could have killed you. And
Right.
the kid, hopefully at that point, is like, I was such a jerk.
Yes. Yes.
And hopefully he's also like, and my dad killed me.
Mhm.
Like, I was grounded forever, like,
Mhm.
I mean, hopefully.
And I bought you a new couch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we got that even better couch.
Mhm.
And so, or we turned that couch around and we all looked at that marker for the next 6 months.
Yes.
Nobody said anything. You continued on with your day and your life. But that
Mhm.
kid, because I'm telling you, if my kids willfully scratched my husband's Corvette and in a moment of spite, like, that's not who they are.
Mhm.
Like, most kids in my work are not thrilled with that choice that they made. They might in the moment be like,
Yeah.
ew, I'm against you and all that stuff. But like, that feeling when you stoop to that level does not feel good for kids.
Right.
But the stepmom, she's going to remember that moment of triumph that kid had, and she's going to hang on to it forever.
Mhm. And I could relate to her because before Jackson, I had 2 things that were my babies. One was I had a Ram Air Trans Am, and I still have a buckskin couch. I love my couch. I have babied that couch. It's 26 years old now. And it still functions. It still looks good because I was so protective of my couch and babied my couch. But I remember a friend of mine was sitting on the couch drinking when I first got it. And I was like, no, you don't drink on the couch. And she's like, excuse me, Martha Stewart. And I said, no, you don't drink on my couch. And you're more than welcome to go sit at the table or sit in this chair, whatever. But I don't want you spilling something on my couch. And I remember she got so mad at me. She said, you were going to end up lonely and with your couch. But when I read this from the stepmom, I remember thinking, I know where she's coming from.
Mhm.
You got these things, you work hard for them. But I also have learned to not put that much emotional weight on
Yes.
materialistic things. And it wasn't easy doing that because David will tell you, when I buy something new, I don't even want to use it because I don't want to mess it up.
Mhm.
But
That's how you get to be the lady who has plastic on your couch.
yes, hey, that's the next step. I'm
Mhm.
kidding. But for me, I was thinking to myself when I saw that post and I went through my thoughts on it of how I understood and then how looking at it from a different perspective and giving it the right emotional weight, I'm thinking, man, I've come a long way. And then when that happened with my light I'm like, I really have come a long way.
Mhm.
David and Ethan both said that they were just waiting for me to flip out when it happened. Because in the past, that's what I would have done.
There's times when I work with parents and I'm like, okay, like feel the feeling, feel the
Yes.
grief and the disrespect and the outrage and all the things that come from having the marker on your white couch.
Mhm.
And then that's where you get out your backpack again and you
Mhm.
tuck them away and you put some perspective on it and be able to get to a place of moving on. Because even if you divorce the guy and never see his kids again, your couch isn't coming back.
That's
Like,
right.
it's still got marker on it.
That's right.
And you can't stay in that state forever.
Mhm.
And so there might be in the nacho spirit, well, you look around the house and you find the things that really matter to you, and maybe it's time to tuck them away.
Right.
Because we all also have the couch that could be markered on and we kind of wouldn't care.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
you know, those are the things like just like you do when you have a toddler, right? You don't wear the necklace your kid's going to grab, and you don't put the wine on the edge of the table for them to pull it down on themselves. Like you learn, and with the dogs and all that stuff, like, you know, occasionally our dog will eat our remote. And I'm like, I get that Lola shouldn't eat the remote. Like 100% I agree with you. But you know what? We have a dog whose face is eye level with the counter. And like, we also can choose to get into the habit of putting the remote in the middle of the counter instead of on the edge. And like, what's actually the shorter way to get to a win here? Is it spending $4,000 on training for Lola so she doesn't eat remotes? Or is it moving the remote to the middle of the counter and understanding probably about every 6 months or so, she's going to eat one and we're going to spend $11
Right.
and like, and be at peace.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't get outraged about this $11 remote. I just can't.
Right.
And so put that stuff away when you got, you know, protect it. That's okay. Set that boundary.
Yep.
But if you didn't, and what's done is done, do your grieving, get to a place of moving on, and keep going.
Yeah. A lot of people think that nachoing is just, oh, I can't say anything. I have to act like it doesn't bother me. No, feel it.
Mm-hmm.
But don't attack your husband or your significant other, and don't attack the stepkids. Go outside and hit and kick a tree, whatever you need to do.
That'll go well for
Yeah,
you.
you can end up in the hospital. Get a punching bag. That's a good idea. Get a punching bag and feel your emotions, because if you don't feel them, they're going to fester up and you're going to explode like a volcano one day. But you've got to feel them, but you've also got to not let them consume your life. I remember one of the kids scratched my car intentionally. There was no doubt.
There's no proof.
And I even went out there and showed David. It was a broken golf club. I said, look, it fits perfectly with those scratches. Oh, he was in denial. And I don't mean the river. So I still think about that occasionally, and not from a perspective of it makes me mad, but it's more of how I knew they did it, but he wasn't going there because there was no proof, which honestly, if there would have been video proof, it still wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered. And I couldn't fix it. It had happened. I chose to be mad about it and then move past it. And thank God it was on the passenger side, so I didn't see it very often.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's when you walk around the car and make sure you don't look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, close your eyes when you get to that side.
Yeah, it's hard because, you know, like sometimes it's not so much about the scratch as much as it's sad to have a scratch in the car. If you had seen it happen with the kid where somebody sideswiped him and you knew 100% it wasn't their fault,
Mm-hmm.
it would still be devastating that there's a scratch in the car. Like it would still be really a big bummer.
Right.
But when you have that same experience and then you're putting all this weight and assumption and you know that this was done purposely, it was done to you. The thing is if your kid is in a space, or one of your kids is in a space where they're taking a golf club and scratching a car, and some things are just done impulsively, some things are just done in a flash, and there
Right.
really isn't like some big, you know, behind the scenes.
Premeditated.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sometimes, I mean, kids just, same with adults, sometimes that happens. But there are sometimes, you know, the things that really hurt or where it's done. I had a kid one time where, I don't know, they had some sort of consequence, like a really mainstream, like you can't have your iPad after dinner or something. And the kid waited till the mom was asleep, or maybe she was like going out with some friends and was staying home with dad, something, where the kid waited. And then the kid went upstairs and ripped page after page out of her like signed, autographed something of a famous sports person. Like it was monetarily valuable as well as really sentimental.
Mhm.
Like, and it was a bio kid did it to a bio mom. I can't even imagine how much worse it would have been if a step kid done it to a stepmom.
Oh,
It'd been relationship ending.
yeah. 100
Yeah,
times
and
worse.
I remember, the premeditation, and when I talked to the kid about it, they're like, "Well, she shouldn't have taken away my iPad."
Oh,
No
God.
remorse. No, like, I know I did it, and I don't even know what I was thinking. Because sometimes kids, you're like, "Why'd you do that?" And they're like, "I don't even know," and they don't.
Mhm.
They're not lying to you. They don't know.
Right.
But man, in this situation, she's like, I waited 3 hours until my mom left the house. And then I went up there and ripped every page out. And it's like she ripped the pages out and then scribbled on them. Like it was like a double whammy,
Oh, wow.
And so anyway, like there's no way to frame that to not be just absolutely awful. But if your kid's doing that, there's something going on. You need to
Yes.
get them some support because they're struggling.
Yes.
And it's like not just about you.
right.
Mhm.
And most of the time with step kids, it's not about you either.
Mm-hmm.
It's about
Yeah,
what
it's
you
about
represent.
What you represent.
Yep.
Twinning.
You owe me a Coke. Well, you said you have written a couple of books or have written a book at least.
I've
What's some
written
books
3
you've written?
books.
Okay.
So I have right here. Since we're videoing it, I only have 3 here or 2 here. So this is the best one. This is it's called Better Behavior, Ages 2 to 10,
Okay.
and written by me, Dr. Terry Egan.
Okay.
And this one, it has a lot of really great common sense behavioral principles that literally will apply to any child, basically any age.
Mhm.
But it talks about the different components of really solid, consistent parenting. How to get your kids to listen, how to give consequences, how to reinforce, how to be a good communicator. And I refer to it like all the time. I have copies in my office, and there's things that I reference over and over.
Mhm.
So that is you can buy it on Amazon. The second one I wrote is one for teenagers. It's called Adolescence, a Parent's Guide. And it breaks down kind of in chunks of ages. Like I think it starts at like age 8 and looking at like before we're in the adolescent years. And then it goes all the way through into young adulthood and having your kids like be in that emerging adult stage
Mhm.
of, common issues, ways to communicate. It's got some good kind of scenarios that you sort of can play out and how to communicate with your kids
Mhm.
about. And then the last one, I hate it when I have to remember all the titles, but it's something like First Time Mom's Toddler Handbook, I think is what it's called. It's yellow. And that is meant to be for parents who have a toddler for the first time, and they're trying to set the stage to be like emotionally responsive and set the stage for success when it comes to their kids, being able to respond to them in a developmentally appropriate way, but setting the stage for them to be like good listeners, be connected,
Oh, we can do that for
control
Kay and
yourself.
Avery.
Have
they
you
have
written
a
a
new-
book? You written a book yet for old ladies to use?
What? There's no way I'm responding to that. You're in trouble, mister.
Yes. David Sims. Your evilness is coming
But-
out.
The one thing I haven't really written about is co-parenting, and I get frozen because I feel like it's hard to sum it all up, and
Yes.
some of this behavioral stuff just seems more, there are some kind of rules to go by, good common sense, fast track practices. But I think when it comes to blending families, co-parenting, like new research coming out all the time, or I lived through a professional experience that is one that I haven't lived through before, and I learned something new. And so I get kind of frozen with like having to commit and have words be in a book for all of eternity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys have that issue with your nacho stuff or not, but
Well,
it's
our
intimidating.
issue is that we actually talked about this with somebody the other night, is that oftentimes when you listen to our podcast and go through some of our courses, you almost see and hear things that are contradicting one another. And it's not that it's contradictory as much as it's information dependent upon where you are in your journey.
Mhm.
So it's, as they say in the legal world, it says fact specific determination. And so we find that if people take one podcast or even just a handful, they can grab this one idea of what it is. And then somebody else is listening to another 2 or 3 podcasts and they have a completely different opinion of what nachoing is.
Right. Because our guests are going through different things and they're in different places in their relationships.
Yeah. And so we sometimes have people say, it sounds like it's being mean to the kids, or it sounds like this. And I'm like, well, like you mentioned early on in the podcast, you did your research, you Googled, you read, you listened. For some reason, that's a lost art. People don't want to look into anything. They want to just, somebody tell me real quick in 3 sentences what this thing is.
Well, or they are looking at sources that are ridiculous, like some random lady in Idaho who's got 7 stepchildren and that's her only frame of reference.
Right.
Is not your expert. Whereas when you are like you guys working with, dozens, hundreds, whatever of people, you've lived it, you are living it, somebody like me who, I probably get, 15, 20 referrals a month for co-parenting, blended family type stuff. And I work, I'm doing trainings and all stuff to stay on top of it. Like, don't have the one clickbait article on BuzzFeed or whatever and have that be the Bible you're living by when it comes to managing this.
Right.
So you're right about the context of it, where they are in their journey, the personalities that are involved. If you're co-parenting with a spouse who is sort of used to being a little bit more passive and maybe having, the mother or the father in the house take on a different, a role versus somewhere else. Like in my family, the mother is the stronger, more assertive person. But
Mine
in
too.
other, and it can depend on cultures and stuff like that. It goes the other way.
I'm talking
And
about my
that's all
mom,
got to be
David,
taken
not
into
me.
account. Not you.
Yeah.
No.
So you can be as assertive as you want. All my kids are moved out. So we are in a different phase of life.
Yes.
Yeah. So we get to take, I told somebody one time that, I finally got to the point where I don't have to deal with the ex that much. And now grandkids are coming into the picture and now the ex is coming back. And so,
Yeah.
now we got to do all that stuff all over again. There was a little hiatus where I didn't have to deal with it, but
A very brief one.
now it's back. But it's back, but it's also different.
It is.
Because it's not, I know it's our grandkid we share together, but it's still a different feeling. It's because I don't have a responsibility for that grandkid like I did my bio kid.
Well, and it is a little easier to do separate grandparenting time, and you might join together on the first birthday or certain events. Typically there's other people there too, like in a group. And so, whereas when you're co-parenting with this other person singly and having your focus on your bio child, it is a very different experience. I have my stepson has 2 children, and I don't know, my husband co-parents really nicely with this. It's just very low drama all around, and she's very welcoming. And so I just don't have drama around that, but I also know the lane I'm in, like I do. And I'm comfortable with that. And I don't need to have some sort of dominance somewhere, with my biological kids, I have a different role and that's appropriate. So, well, I definitely, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, David.
I was going to say, one of my family members said, so you are going to make sure they have separate birthday parties for this grandkid, right? So that for each side of the family. And I looked at them, I said, you think that's reasonable to expect them to have 2 birthday parties because we can't be in the same room together? That's not reasonable.
You can't stand across the dining room and hold your plate of cake.
I know. I was like, and then, they thought about it and they were like, yeah, you're right. That's not a reasonable ask. I'm like, just bear with it,
Yeah. Think, people, think.
Just bear with it.
So many times that people are in the same room with somebody they don't like. At work,
right now.
Some annoying person in Harris Teeter. What? You were digging your hole, man. I would not want to be you tonight. You're going to be sleeping in the back of the Trans Am.
Doghouse.
Trans Am.
Oh, I got rid of that. We got the Honda now.
Oh, okay.
It's okay.
Well, I know we didn't mention this in the episode, but we talked about it in my podcast, is actually how close we live together.
Mhm.
Like in real life, like we actually live, what do we think, like 45 minutes apart?
Yes.
And so we live in the same county.
Mhm.
And we live in South Carolina. My practice is on the south end of Charlotte. So
Like Indian land, right?
Valentine.
Yeah, I
Valentine.
live in Indian land, but my practice is in that Valentine Pineville area in Charlotte. It's got a Charlotte zip
Yeah.
code.
I'll be in Indian Land in the morning.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I'll be at
Oh.
Cross Ridge Cafe.
Oh yeah. I just heard, like, I don't even know where that is, but somebody else mentioned that today. They work there or something. But
And your
we do live
assistant or
together.
something likes Nacho Kids, right?
Yeah. She lives
Oh
in like
yeah, she's a step
Huntersville.
parent. She lives in Huntersville.
Yeah.
She has been on vacation for 2 weeks. My life has been terrible. She's literally flying back right now. Julie, you need to come home. I cannot handle this business.
Come back to me, Julie. Come back to me, Julie.
Come back.
Well, Julie, when you come back, David and I and you and Tara are going to have to meet for dinner one night.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, that would be so. And I have 2 new practitioners in my practice. Has grown into a small group practice, and we're getting new office space, and we're like doing all this exciting stuff. And one of the new clinicians, Madison Gabriel is her name, she's training to be a play therapist, but she's super interested in this dynamic of working with families who have experienced, separation, divorce,
Mhm.
and are moving together towards blended families. So she has been really interested in all the resources, that I bring to the table, as well as the connections that I
Mhm.
have. So I know she'll be excited to listen to this podcast. But I mean, if for those out there who are listening, if you're in that Charlotte area and you need support with co-parenting,
Mhm.
or you have kids who are struggling, it doesn't have to just be about divorce or separation, but you can find us at www.egancounseling.com. And like, we support all kinds of families. It's not just families experiencing this, but I don't know, we're super passionate about our work. We really try to give good customer service and be responsive to the folks we work with. And I don't know, we're digging it. Super exciting.
Yes.
Yeah. And folks, if you're in the area, definitely call her, because people call us all the time. Like, do you know anybody in
Mhm.
my area? I wish we had a directory of people that we actually knew, did good work, because it's hard to find an MFT that, that you feel like you can put your
Yeah.
name behind.
Mhm.
Well, and it's tougher too, because you guys are down deeper into the county, and it's harder to build up, our practice. I'm in Charlotte. Like, there's
Mhm.
we have so much need for mental health services. I mean, I know parents that are, sometimes calling, a dozen practices before they can find somebody with openings. And,
Mhm.
Yes.
and then if you have a specific need, you need to
Mhm.
work with somebody who specializes in trauma or certain genetic disorder or grief or something like that, it can be even more complicated. And so
Mm.
that was a real motivator behind me hiring more people.
Mhm.
Is it's like, there's all these referrals, there's all this work we could be doing, and we just need to have a bigger team of people
Yes.
who can work with these families. And, in families where there's multiple kids, the
Mhm.
same therapist can't see them all.
Right.
So yeah, I have a lot of compassion for folks out, where you live, because I'm sure there's a significant shortage.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest. And I'm serious. We're going to do dinner or lunch or
I would love
whatever
that.
one day.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
It's
Yeah.
been great.
Yeah. Talk to you later.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
We would like to thank Dr. Tara Egan for being a guest on our podcast. And we are excited to go have lunch with her one day. We need to schedule that, David.
Yep. I'm ready. Let me know.
Yeah, we need to do it soon before all the holidays come and we're too busy.
Oh, you got like 2 weeks then. You better make it happen.
Yeah. All right. So, Tara Egan, if you are listening to this, we are going to be messaging you about doing lunch soon. All right, David. I can't think of anything else we've got going on except y'all go like our TikTok. Even if you don't like it, follow it. Help us spread the word. I'm going to be getting some confidence up.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. And I'm going to be doing some TikToks. No, I ain't dancing.
Is that what they call them? TikToks?
I reckon. I don't know.
Are you going to be a TikToker?
Maybe. We'll see what happens. And don't
All
forget,
right.
we're on Instagram too.
Man, you're everywhere.
Yeah, I know. It's scary.
Yeah. It's almost like your dating life.
All right, y'all. We're wrapping this up because I'm done.
All right. Join us next week. And remember, until then, life is good.
When you nacho.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nacho Kids Podcast. Find us online at nachokids.com. Until next time, remember, life is good when you nacho.